And this is Aksharam powered by DC Books. And we are moving on to the next session. Can literature speak to power?
The participants of the session is Georgi Gospodinov, Jenny Erpenbeck, Paul Lynch in conversation with Manasi Subramaniam.
Hello, everyone, and thank you so much for spending your Sunday evening with us. We know it's precious, and we promise to make it worth your while. We are here to talk about the simple question, seemingly simple question: can literature speak truth to power? We're living through a truly extraordinary moment. And I think just the question of speaking truth to power means so many things, because this is certainly the age of disinformation. It is the age in which, tech giants know more about us in terms of how they surveil us than like even state surveillance did in the previous eras. The world of algorithmic, like a bubble has been created. And for all of these reasons, I think we are living through an era in which the negotiation of what truth means is going to be quite central to the way in which we live our lives. I have with me three incredible speakers. All three of them have won the Booker Prize in recent years. And apart from being Booker Prize winners, each of them has also lived through and written about fairly profound political transitions. So I think it's only fair that I begin with the fundamental question that's at the heart of this session. Can literature speak truth to power? And I'd love to hear what all three of you think. Paul, would you like to begin?
Good afternoon. It's a question, it's an old question. It gets asked all the time. And we're laboring under a misapprehension because it's a false question in many ways. The question should be, can literature speak truth? And the answer is yes. Because, well, what power do any of us have at any point in time? We have no power over ourselves, over our mind. We have no power over our loved ones. We experience love. We don't own love. We have no power over our fate, over our destiny. We have no power over death. We have no power over our own alienation within our society, whatever way you want to measure that. And so literature has to be metaphysical for that reason. It has to bring to bear as maximum complexity to the world, because reality can contain the political, but the political cannot contain reality. And so I make this space for literature because I think that when we take literature at what it does best, it's a form of inquiry. It's a form of truth seeking. It's about asking questions and not seeking answers. A lot of fiction that is decidedly political knows the answers to its own problems. It's seeking to change the world because it knows what the solution is. That's grievance. What I'm talking about on the other side is grief, which is powerlessness, which is our general condition within this, what Whitman called the all. We don't know what this is. And so I find, even though I've written a book that a lot of people think has a lot of moral power, political power, I didn't write it like this. I didn't write it from the point of view of asking political questions. I wrote it from the point of view of the existential, of the personal. That's the only way to write as far as I'm concerned.
Georgi, what do you think?
I think literature can do simple things. One of them is to postpone the end. We know this from Shahrazad. You're telling one story one night and you gain one more day and one more day. So we could postpone the end in a way. But literature can create taste. I think it could be a political thing to create the taste. Because propaganda could be very kitschy, nationalism could be very kitschy, and if you recognize it like a kitschy thing, it's a political act. So these two simple things, I think, are important. are superpowers, part of superpowers of the literature. Of course, literature can't stop war or tanks, but she can inject it hesitation in someone who should drive this tank, or who should, I don't know, I believe, maybe it's naive, but literature can put some hesitation. Okay, who is against me? Literature could create something very important, empathy. And I think that some of the war starts because of the deficit of the empathy. And when we are telling our stories, when I met for the first time Paul last night, and when I tell him my stories about my daughter, I don't know, about my parents, and he tell me his stories, this is it not easy to make him my enemy and to kill him or to hit him. Because this is the other superpower of literature. We're talking about, we're sharing our personal things, we're telling stories, and we make wider this field of empathy, let's say.
And Jenny, what do you think?
Yeah, I think a politician, also my experience at least, is that politicians don't read novels because they don't have time to read novels. So all we can do is, I think, to share our view of things that perhaps should be made better. So, like once I wrote a novel about African refugees. And I tried to just take my time, and this is perhaps the privilege of being a writer, is that you can go in the middle of things that interest you, and you can start doing some research, talking to people, bringing their stories, like putting their stories into a book, bringing it to life for others. Because it's if you see something on the TV, you see some news, it's far away. You cannot connect to people, and I think literature, in some cases, makes it possible to identify with people who are like completely different from you yourself, who are living under different conditions and are connected to perhaps to our world, but in a way that we wouldn't expect. And you can, I think literature has this opportunity to tell personal stories, and I think this makes a big difference.
I mean, all three of you have touched upon this thing, which is, can literature speak truth to power is one question, but literature also has its own power. And I guess the question is, what is the power that one is trying to speak to? There are three sort of classical positions in the question of whether art is political or not. There's the art for art's sake position, which is Oscar Wilde, and that comes from Ireland. There's the Brechtian position, which comes from Germany, which is art is political intervention. And the third that I would think of is probably Sartre, who talks about like art as being like an engaged and committed form of resistance as well. So there are these three sort of broadly classical positions, I think. And I guess what I wonder, based on your answers also, is it's clear that you're not setting out to write a political novel, but is the act of writing itself a political act? And especially right now, in this sort of late stage of capitalism, just the act of doing something, even if it's purely for art's sake, even if it's purely for aesthetic purposes, is that just a political act? Paul, I'd love to hear what you think about.
Oh my God. You use the word resistance, and I think it's so interesting that when I read fiction, very often I see two types of writers. I see writers writing against something, and I see writers writing towards what they don't know. That kind of fiction is the kind I'm interested in, because Keats talked about what he called negative capability. When you're reaching after that which you do not know, when you're reaching into the unknown without seeking after certainty, without seeking after facts, which is fundamentally the mysterious condition that we find ourselves in. Keats said that Shakespeare had maximal negative capability. And you can tell the difference in writers who have that, because what they're doing is they're asking questions that also include the political. They bring in all of these things, these aspects, but they also include a multitude of other lenses. Because what we're looking for is somehow to seize hold of reality. That's a profoundly difficult thing to do as a writer of any kind, to grab hold of the real. Because the real it's infinitely beyond us, and yet we all take a stab at it. But, the political is just one tiny aspect of it. But, the way I view what art is, in terms of it's fundamentally an act of authenticity of the self. I'm a meditator. I've been meditating for a very long time, and that small, still voice that we have inside ourselves, that's being lost within the moment that we're in, because we're so atomized in terms of our consciousness, how we think, that we are no longer even hearing our own internal signal. Writing is tuning into that signal. It's living alongside that signal. So it is, in many ways, it's a spiritual act, if you want to use the word, without any religious connotations. It's an act of fundamental inquiry. But when you listen to that signal, when you live with that signal, that's the most authentic statement you can make as a person. And so it's not political. It's something else. When Robinson Crusoe lands on that desert island, what he's met with is the cosmos. He's met with his response to the cosmos and his God, and the political falls away.
I was asking about art for art's sake versus art as political intervention. Aesthetic art versus art as a...
Yeah. I thought about this, but to add something, Joseph Brodsky, famous poet and essayist, he says that aesthetic is not just aesthetic. Aesthetic is before everything, before the ethic, before the political, and this is very important, and this is a question of taste that I mentioned. How, when you recognize the kitsch, the ugly thing, the fake, the lie, you will have more resistance against the propaganda, let's say. That's why literature or aesthetic as well, they're part of the resistance. They create resistance. And there is a famous poet, Zbigniew Herbert. He had a poem on the question of taste. And I recommend this poem. It's a great poem because he says, it wasn't a question of braveness. Sometimes it was just a question of taste. Not to say yes, to turn back when they speak some stupid things. So we could start with this, and this is very important. Sometimes I know people underestimate literature or aesthetic, or they could say, okay, well, you just tell some stories, it's nothing. But in a way, it's very important, especially now when we have this fighting of the stories, of different stories. And maybe it's old-fashioned, but I believe that the way we're telling our stories matters.
I hope I got you right. But I think writing always is something. So, like the seriously meant writing is something that takes its freedom. So, this is also a political act, even if the story itself doesn't deal with politics or questions of power. So, also, I doubt that you can write a novel without a point of view. Even if you try hard, you will always have to make cuts and to make a decision about what to show or what to tell in the novel. So you have to leave out, you will do perhaps some research, you will have some material, and it's always the question, what will make its way into the story and what you leave out. So I think there's hardly any novel that is beyond politics. Because even if you write just a love story, different from my love story, because my love story is kind of also political story. But if you write just a love story, it's a decision to not write about other things. So I think in this way, I would consider literature always being political in a way, but of course there are books in which it is not that obvious, or it's only on long term to be seen that this was kind of a prophetic mind or something like that.
Yeah. I'd like to now bring the question quite specifically to your respective novels, and maybe, Georgi, we can start with you. Time Shelter is a book that uses memory in a very powerful way. And the idea, to me at least, it seemed like collective memory is almost a response to historical erasure. And I found that so incredibly powerful. And at the same time, the sentimentality or nostalgia that also creeps into the way we remember things, those are deeply and intensely personal as well. So somehow I feel like, and I think I felt this in all three of your novels, that it is the personal that is the most political. So I'd love to hear about the role that memory plays for you in this.
Yeah, the memory has many dimensions, of course. We also could have memory about the things that never happened. Usually we're thinking that we remember what happened, but sometimes I have this kind of memories about the things I'm longing for, but they never happened to me. And this is specific kind of memory. Also, you could have memory from the books. I clearly remember how I smoked these very hard cigarettes in Remarque's novels. When I was younger, I liked to read these Erich Maria Remarque's novels. And you remember that they drink Calvados all the time and smoked very hard cigarettes. And I still pretend that I remember the taste of this Calvados and this cigarette. So this is also a way of create memory. But why? Because this is a novel about Alzheimer and dementia. And why memory is literally and metaphorically important. When we have dementia, Alzheimer, of course, losing your memory is losing your, not to say your identity. I don't like this word, but this is shortly to explain what happens. You have also a memory of the body, which is also very important memory. At the end phases of the Alzheimer, you start to forget how to breathe, how to swallow, how to move your legs. And this is also a question of memory. Many things are question of memory. About collective and personal memory. Of course, it's a very normal to have personal nostalgia, to have personal invented or not invented memories. The problem comes when someone tries to invent collective memories of the society. And when someone tries to explain to myself that I was happy in 1978 because it was during the communist times, not because I was 12 and I was happy for myself. I'm coming from Bulgaria, and we had this. They promised us bright future in the communist time. It was typical for this ideology to promise you that in the future you will be happy, the communism will be everywhere, and the life will be like this. After that, now the populists promised to my daughter a bright past. And I don't know to give them, I have memory about my past. So I don't want to sell my memory. I don't want they to promise to my daughter something that is, what to say, that is based on the future, which will never happen. Actually, when I'm talking this, I should be clear. Now, what populists promise to us is actually it's not a real future. It's a past dressed or masked like a future. Because when you say you will be great again, what you are selling, what you are promising, you're promising the past, which looks like a future.
And Paul, if I may, Prophet Song feels like a warning siren, and I guess we have moved from the realm of the past to the realm of the future, but it's also like a terrifyingly plausible future. And I wonder, was there a specific moment in recent history, in contemporary global or Irish politics, where you thought this is where we might be headed, and you ended up creating this world?
The interesting thing about Prophet Song is the way that it's read, depending on where you come from. So I received a lot of questions from a Dutch newspaper from readers, and all the questions related to, do you think this is what's going to happen to us? Do you think this is our future? Do you think this is where we're going? So they were only reading the book as a cautionary tale. But the book contains that particular reading if you want it to be that. But at the same time, the book speaks to the actual lived reality of millions of people around the world who are suffering dispossession and destruction on a biblical scale. I mean, we live at a time, perhaps we've always lived at a time, where the biblical is possible, where the epic is actually what we're seeing on our news, where we're seeing the dispossessed traverse continents to reach a place of greater safety. In Prophet Song, Ailish Stack, who's the heroine of the novel, who goes through the 9 circles of hell, so to speak, in terms of losing everything. Towards the end of the novel, she has this epiphany that what we watch on the news, what we've always been watching on the news, is actually the end of the world. That's actually what we're seeing. That this idea of biblical end times, this sudden cataclysm, that it's a myth, that's just a story we grow up with, and that the end of the world is always it's always a recurrence. It's always local. At the end of the world is always a local event, and that's what this book is speaking about. It's the end of the world. It comes to your town. It comes to your city, and it knocks on your door. And it's the end of the world for you and your family and your community and your people. And we watch it on the news. And I'm not sure how we can bridge that particular problem, but that's part of the questions that the book is asking. I'm probably drifting out at this point because I'm so hot up here, my brain is cooking.
Perfect sense. So I think that's fair. I guess different people would read it differently. Jenny, we've talked about sort of the past as a memory, but I wonder if you could come in on, the book that you have written begins at a much later stage than the contents of the novel. It begins when the character is much older and is reflecting, and the rest of the book almost seems to reflect on this catastrophic relationship that she is revisiting. And I wonder if you also look at it as a memory of that entire time, and maybe you can also weigh in a little bit on whether, in terms of like the specific era that you have depicted in the novel, which is so much also an era of surveillance, how do you think that sort of controlling atmosphere builds up in the novel in the same way that it builds up between the two characters in the novel?
Yeah. When I started writing the novel, I started with a present at this time, and then I found out this is not the right way to look at it, and so I invented this kind of frame with a prologue and an intermezzo in the middle, and with an epilogue. Which all of these three short scenes are placed 30 years later. And I think what interested me was that if someone is looking at some material, it's in different times you can tell different stories with the same material. Or if you look at some boxes with some documents and you all of a sudden you see that the documents are mixed up and the beginning and the end and the middle, they are not in chronological order, but they are like touching each other. So they are commenting each other as well. And I this was the starting point of like writing it in the way I did it. So with a cardboard box 1 and a cardboard box 2, so that that you can have a look at the ideal time and the time in which these ideals are rotten or lost or don't work anymore or like become their own negative form. And in the same way, it's like the love is starting as something glorious, there's an age gap of more than 30 years between the two lovers, but still it's like a real love in the beginning, and then it becomes something else, even something that is abusive and controlling from the man's side. So you have this surveillance that you mentioned, and of course there are parallels. Everybody knows about the Stasi, and the funny thing was that in the very beginning I thought I will be the first one to write a novel about East Germany without mentioning the Stasi in the center of it. But then I did some research, and it turned out that there were stories that I couldn't make a detour around. So, and this, in a way, the story also changed me. So I was governed by my own story in a way. And I thought it's interesting that the surveillance is so much an instrument, a tool of power, more than a tool of information. The information only is the vehicle for the power. So all the information the Stasi collected was not needed. Nobody could look at it. Nobody could make some use of it. And this was strange. And in the very end, I had the feeling this surveillance was the last way to produce loyal citizens in a way. So they didn't manage to connect to the people in a like grown-ups way to also let them the new generation have their own ideas and so on. But they tried to draw them into the system of the Stasi as if they would become loyal only by sharing the secrets of the government.
But also to reverse the subject of this conversation a little, in your writing of that particular period in time, it is art and culture and music. These things become very important to the characters. Art almost kind of rescues them from the mundanities of life a little bit. And so you could also look at it as the reverse of the conversation we're having. Is art speaking truth to power? Perhaps, but at the same time, when someone is trying to control you or like show their power over you, art is the thing that everyone seems to be drawn to. That's certainly what I got from your novel.
I think art in times of not having freedom is also a way to communicate within the society. It's also a way of like fleeing from the outside world, so you will turn inwards. But in a way, I think the attention and like the value that art has under the condition of a dictatorship is much bigger, because there's no open language in the media possible. So you will try to hide your messages, and to it produces also a special kind of readership, because people get used to read behind the lines, and they will be much more attentive to the hidden messages, and they will be used to reading the layers of something. So in a way, which is like kind of a sad truth, is perhaps a dictatorship is producing the better readers, and perhaps also the better writers, because you need some techniques to make a detour.
And quite like the love story in Jenny's book, Paul, in your novel, it is this very deeply intimate familial space that you're actually exploring. The tension comes from the intimate space rather than the political tension surrounding it, I feel. Was the personal the most political for you as well?
Oh, we're going to have to drop the word political. I'm going to take it and I'm going to throw it out there, and it's not going to come back. You know, what I look for is scalability, maximum scale. So I'm looking for a story that can view the human condition as though from a cosmic eye, as though looking at us from on high in all our glory and our pain and our misery and wonder and whatever it is that makes us up. But at the same time, it is the ability to get down to the texture of the furniture, the arrangements of the furniture in the room, to get into the emotions, to hold all of that in one space. And in Prophet Song, for example, that includes, fundamentally, is the domestic, because we're in a space of unraveling, but we don't live our lives at the center of political action. We live our lives in our homes. We live our lives within an immense complexity. We're trying to hold down busy careers. We're trying to bring up kids. We're trying to deal with elderly parents. If you're a stack, if you're at that particular age where you're in your 40s and you get that squeeze, where you're dealing with this peak complexity, how are you supposed to keep an eye at the same time on the unraveling of truth, or the, the sense that the world you've always grown up with, that it's actually slowly sliding away? It's very hard to hold all of that in the same space, because you got to make sure there's enough milk in the fridge. But I just want to veer off for a second about away from the political, about what art can also do, about why we keep going back to it, about the value of it. It's the validation that you get when you read a great poem, or you read a great novel. There's the validation of your experience as a human being in the world. It's not solace, and that's it's a problematic word, but it's the ability of seeing you or all seen. Of us. You're being seen, and I often think of literature in this fashion. That I think about it in terms of when we think of physicists or mathematicians creating equations in the abstract of truths that we can't quite see, but we know they're true. Fiction writers, poets are doing the same thing. What they're doing is they're creating equations of human truth that are in the abstract, that are completely made up, but they're true. It's why we keep going back to the canonical works. So however you want to conceive of the canon, it exists. It exists because it is a huge repository of human truth. So you can choose any writer that you keep going back to. There's a reason why you go back to them. And all the great writers who we revere wrote their versions of truth in these equations. That's their own style. That's their own approximation of the world, but that's what makes them unique. And so the equations are always changing, the sensibilities are always changing, the conventions of art are always changing. But the fundamental qualities that make it endure and allow us to seek validation remains.
And Georgi, just sort of jumping off from what Paul just said, why fiction? Why fiction specifically is as the vehicle for, because you're dealing with historical timelines and these are actual historical timelines. So why is it that all of us are so drawn to the vehicle of fiction?
I'm not sure if I could make clear differences between genres. I don't believe in this clear border between genres. My novels are they are not Aryan, let's say. They are not purebred novels. They are novels which include all times many physics, in the physics of sorrow, many natural history in my natural novel. Here in Time Shelter, there is a lot of medicine, neurology. So I believe that even I could say something more. I think that when the real things happen, they don't happen in a full scale. They start to happen when you narrate them, when you tell stories about them. Then you create memory, actually. That's why we are telling stories. Maybe this is the shortest answer. Yeah, we use fiction because to create memory and because we would like to have sense that the real things are really happened to us. Without fiction, it doesn't matter. If I try to describe one of my day hour by hour, it will be very stupid day. Empty day, empty hours, in an empty room, nothing doing or doing something that is not important at all. But if I try to put this in a story and to find something beyond the things, then I could give meaning. Everything is about meaning. I think that people, they read horoscopes because they would like to know that something is, there is some meaning behind everything, that someone thinking about them, and that they are part of the big map of the sublime that is somewhere else. Maybe that's why, we are writing. I'm writing fiction. For me, it's a way to understand the things that happened around me. I think that telling stories is a first step to understanding, a first step of the reflection. You need to put something in the story, and then you understand what happened to you.
I feel like all three of you have kind of talked mostly about how like fiction as a tool for empathy, for being seen, for almost like surviving difficult times. All of these things keep pointing to the idea of empathy, and I think maybe that is the real power that great literature has when speaking truth to power. Okay, I think we have a little time for audience questions. If there's a mic that can be...
Sir, the theme is very wonderful and very touching, because can literature speak to power? Because literature itself is a great source of power. First thing is that. And in Indian situation, I'm talking about the Indian situation, the literature in India and the political power in India and the media power in India and the bureaucratic power in India, all are managed by the same class of people. There is the cross-thread people, fellows, the Brahmins and Banyas and such migrant caste people. People call them as upper caste, but we call them as migrant caste. But their culture, the literature actually has nothing to do with majority of life, Indian life. Their life, their area is very, very limited area. And they talk about and write about a lot of things, but actually it doesn't touch the real Indian life. So literature, of course, it can revolutionize people's thinking, but it can also enslave people. The literature in India, run by the Brahmins and the upper caste, migrant caste people, are doing enslaving people through the literature. This is a pathetic condition. Whereas in Europe and other countries, it's entirely different. You have a democratic value system, but in India we have only nominal political democracy, no democratic values, because here there is no brotherhood in India. There is no fraternity in India. It's only caste system. Brahmin, it's a sacred apartheid that is going on in India, sacred apartheid. It's most dangerous because the slavery in India is sanctified, divinity with the divinity. So every literature, whatever it may, everything is managed by this anti-human group of people, this cross-bearing people. So this is the condition of it. I don't know how this situation can be changed in India. I think, of course, the global level literature and the writers will have to do something in this thing. That's what I think.
Sir, I don't think there was a question, but thank you so much for your comment. Really appreciate it.
Hi, sir. My question is to Paul, sir, actually. Yesterday, while talking about your book, The Prophet Song, you did mention that you have a tragic worldview. As an artist, as a writer, how do you navigate with this tragic worldview without falling into some hopelessness while observing the things happening in the world around us?
Oh, what a good question. How do you not fall into the abyss? I actually did for a little while on my second book. I saw too far in and I got a little bit lost for a while. It's a dangerous occupation. And I learned a lesson from that. I think that the tragic worldview is an old-fashioned idea, but somehow it seems to speak to me, all of life is loss, everything is impermanent. How do we know ourselves in the world when we're neither here nor there? Death is the absolute, all the obvious questions. This is what interests me. And I seek to find a modern way to tackle these questions, to reframe them within a modern context, to reframe them within our own conditioning, so to speak, within our own language. But how do you not fall in? When I was writing Prophet Song, the book opens up the abyss. Particularly chapter 8. If anyone's read the book, they know chapter 8. Chapter 8 actually pulls it wide open and it asks the reader to look in. And that's a dangerous thing to do. It's a big ask. I couldn't write that chapter for months because I knew that what I had to do required enormous responsibility as a novelist. I also knew that I didn't have the language yet to do it. But I realized while writing this book that there's a certain elevation of language. There's a certain approach that lends it a charge of the poetic. Because when it has that quality, it's narrated. Virgil accompanied Dante through hell. And so the language is there as a reminder that the poet is accompanying the reader through hell. So it is through beauty that we don't fall in.
Hello. The question I have to ask you is, I'm going to publish a poetry book. So the question I wanted to ask was, what are the most important aspects in writing and poetry? The philosophy that you work on, that what is the point or the aim when you write poetry or writings? Is it to challenge the basic idea of society or the general ideas in general?
I started with poetry. Actually, I still writing poetry, and I think that poetry is the For me, I could say that I'm a kind of smuggler of poetry into the novels. I pretend that I'm writing novels, but I just try to put inside some poetry. Why poetry is important? You know that the memory, actually the poetry and the rhythm in the poetry was very important from the very beginning, ages ago, to create memory. We know about the Trojan War because of Iliada, because of Homer. And so it's a mnemotechnique in a way, writing poetry. Because it's the easiest way to remember something. Can you put it in the rhythm? And so this is one explanation why poetry is important.
I think we appear to have run out of time. Yeah. Okay. All right. Thank you so much. You've been a wonderful audience. I wish we could have taken more questions, but thank you very much for spending your Sunday with us. Oh, okay. We've been granted a bonus 10 minutes.
Yeah, Ms. Erpenbeck, Mr. Gospodinov, and Mr. Lynch, such an honor. My question is to all the three of you. So I have read that Ms. Erpenbeck has some history with the music as a discipline and theatre, and you have some history as a screenwriter, and you had been a film critic for a while, if I'm not wrong. So my question is, how do you see the influence of another art form into your writing, especially the discipline of spectacle, theatre in that case, or film in that case? So do you see an influence in the way you write from that kind of a form? And to Mr. Paul Lynch, how much ever far you throw the political in an Indian audience, it will come right back at you, because we just can't afford to be just sublime. We just can't escape our social reality. We want to. We are desperate. We want art for art's sake. We want to create sublime poetry. We want to create sublime artwork. But we also have the shangles of our social reality. So it's quite difficult for us. So how much ever far you throw political in an Indian audience, it will come right back at you.
If I'm going to answer that, I'll just say that every great work of art that you've ever read that's endured beyond your particular point of view there. I'm just going to say that I'm a musician. You just consume from everything. I used to listen to a lot of jazz when writing. I had to actually stop listening to jazz because it was getting into my sentences. It was starting to play with them a little bit too much, and so I just listen to white noise now. But the visual for me was important as a film critic into a novelist, because I think it's very important to place an image into the reader's mind. I think it's very important to demonstrate your ideas and not of course to tell them, but also the image is the way into the symbolic. And we are symbolic animals. This is what we do. This is why we require art. The symbolism symbols are how we carry our burden. It's how we learn to carry that. And so the image is the way to that. It's the most direct route. And cinema refines, I think, to a certain degree, one's sense of what the image can be.
I felt a pause for the man.
Yeah. Sorry.
No, I can only tell about my experiences that I made in the theater. So before studying opera directing, which is a kind of a very special study, I also studied some called something like Science of Theater in Berlin. And I think what I really learned during these studies was how to cut, what to leave out, to make a decision about what really matters to a novel or not. So I would be become very good in just throwing away passages already written and or even leaving it out before writing it down. And I also I like the freedom in opera, the freedom of like having a structure of, in some passages it says telling a plot and then all of a sudden opening up a completely different space for an area, for contemplating on something. And I think this is, in a way, in opera it's surreal, but it is connected by the music. And in a book you can also do so if you are free enough. And so I think opera helped me to develop this kind of structure.
Hi. So my question is for Jenny Erpenbeck. In your previous novel, End of Days, you have this device where a character dies at the end of one part of the book, and then the next part begins as if she had not died and continues the story in a different setting. I was wondering if you could tell us a bit about what made you choose that device to tell that story of the mid-20th century in all these European cities.
That's a book in which the main character is dying 5 times, and she's, in every chapter she is dying a different kind of death, and she's leaving behind other people. So it might look like a biography that has some cuts in it, but what interested me was to look at the material of a biography in different ways. So you will, the death is always something that, some moment in which you look back, what personality has passed away. Why had she died in this way? What did she lose? What was the kind of like message of her life? But when you follow the path of one character, you will see what matters is always something different. So in the beginning of her life, love is like she's dying out of love. Then she's dying a political death. Then she's dying some very honorable death and gets a state funeral and things like that. And in the end, she's just an old woman who has only the company of her son. So it's a very personal chapter, and still she is someone who was a lover once, who was a political woman once, who was very honored once. And all this is shifting in the course of those years, and this interested me.
Hello, this is a question to Jenny Erpenbeck. I wonder how much your novel, Kairos, addressed to a very dumb and, in a way, a deeply traditional power structure, which is the father. We call Germany is a fatherland. Germany is not a motherland, fatherland. So in this novel, Kairos, this Katharina looking for a father in Hans. In a way, kind of Hans was asking...
She says no.
Yeah. No, Hans was asking whether you're looking for a father figure. And maybe because, she said no. But then in the beginning, in the prologue itself, it's clear that it's all this nostalgic memory of her father. So how this addressed to this lost father and fatherland, and also the inherent power structure in that?
I never thought about it, but he's right. The fatherland. That's funny because I think in this novel she has a good father already. She's not missing one. So actually, I think she's not looking for a father. And of course, he gives her the chance to learn a lot. Perhaps she's looking for a teacher. And she is like at the beginning of her own personal history, so she is perhaps also seeking some suffering. This is what I think.
Good evening. It's an absolute honor to have all the three of you with us here today. My question is about writing as a process in general. And I would like to ask Mr. Lynch, because Mr. Lynch yesterday mentioned that he was, while he was discussing Prophet Song, that he was working on a draft before Prophet Song, and he realized that that particular draft was not working for him. So I want to ask you, Paul, how do you know that some story, some idea is something that should be worked on, something that should be persevered with? And how do you know that, well, something is just not working? Is it something very intuitive or? Thank you.
Well, Ingmar Bergman has a quote that I love very much about filmmaking that applies to what we all do. And he says, intuition is the spear you throw into the dark. Intellect is the army you send in afterwards. So at some point, you're working always with both. But I was working on the wrong novel. And the reason it wasn't working is because it wasn't taking the shape of a vessel that I like storytelling to be. I consider myself a storyteller above all things. I want my ideas to be in the hold of the ship. And so I want smooth sailing. I want a vessel that will move out. And the story I was writing was not giving me any of that. And I was coming at it from multiple directions. I tend to write in a linear fashion. And so I tend to write with a certain opening sentence that contains everything I need. And I wasn't getting it. And so I swerved. And the swerve is really important. I love that idea of, when Satan was cast out of heaven and as he fell through the abyss towards hell, what would have happened if he'd swerved instead? I think swerving in your life is a really powerful idea, and you have to know when to do it. When to do it is largely an intuitive act.
I think that brings us to the end of our session. Thank you so much for spending your evening with us, and thank you so much to our brilliant, brilliant authors and panelists.